Welcome everyone. Good evening. Welcome to Testimony Tuesdays. I see you in here, Shingi. I'll let you in just a minute. So let me know in the comments where you're all tuning in from. Thank you, Lee Fine Art. Yeah, I really like collecting artwork like this. So I'm sure you know something about that, judging by your username. But yeah, just add something to the environment. We're actually just coming out of a thunderstorm from a few minutes ago. So I was worried about the connection, but so far everything's good. Alright, so we're gonna get started. I'm just gonna read Dr. Shinji's introduction and then I'll bring him in. So welcome everyone who's tuning in to Testimony Tuesdays. If this is your first time, I am the host, Dr. Beauty, and I started this interview series last September. It's amazing how it's almost a year since we started this, but I wanted to create an opportunity for people to talk about what keeps them going, what makes them tick, whether that's their professional lives or overcoming personal hardships. And it's really been a huge success. A lot of people have been able to share their stories, inspire people out there who are going through similar situations or who are aspiring to be on the same career path as that. So, and we have a lot of people as well who have come on that talk about their nonprofits and other community service projects that they're doing. So without further ado, I'm going to read Shinji's introduction and then I'll bring him into the room. Shingi Mavima is a graduate of the African American and African Studies program at Michigan State University. Born and raised in Zimbabwe, Mavima has published 2 poetry anthologies, Homeward and Mirage of Days Old, as well as 1 novel, Pashena. He is also the co-founder and executive director of CLUBHOUSE International, a nonprofit organization dedicated to working with the Zimbabwean primary school students in community building projects. He is currently an assistant professor in the history department at the University of Toledo, Ohio. So everyone please put in your applause emojis in the comments as I bring in Dr. Shingi. Good evening. How are you?
Hey, Dr. Beauty. I'm doing great, and I'm honored to be here. Indeed.
The honor is mine. It's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for your time this evening.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. So you know, I'm not sure where you're located now, but there's been a lot of crazy weather happening around the country. So hopefully you've been spared from that.
Yeah, surprisingly, because on some days here it's been wild, but today and the past few days we haven't had any issues. I'm out in Toledo, Ohio right now, and it looks, granted I spend most of my time indoors, but it looks beautiful looking out the window. So
Nice.
yeah, indeed.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to hear that. And before we get started, I always ask a little icebreaker question. So my icebreaker question for you is, you have a history of writing poetry. If you had to choose one topic to write poetry about for the rest of the year, and only that topic, what would it be and why?
I know exactly what it is, but I'm trying to find the word for it here. Just outlooks on life, No, in fact, let me switch that and say I would write letters in poetry form to as many people that are in my life as possible. So yeah, that's a trend that I've written a few poems like that, and consistently those are my favorite. So I think I would say, and almost like If You Never Hear From Me Again series of poems to the people that I care about in my life, indeed.
Wow, that's amazing because you can really express yourself all the way in those poems and let people know how
Right,
you feel about them. That's wonderful.
indeed. Yeah,
And I think,
indeed.
especially since what the world went through last year, and even still, we're finding more importance in doing that every day.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And I think while I've been writing poetry like this for a long time, I think it really came to a head last yeah, once we got into this era, and you realize that you have family around the world, and due to travel restrictions and even just our personal means, and knowing that there's this thing going on around the world, it's almost like there was a moment where you have to resign yourself that, really, to put it in very blunt terms, that if folks started to die right now, that's, you're very powerless, and to, you know, because of all those reasons. And it was a terrible resignation. It was a terrible resignation, but I mean, we lived through it. And I say this with all due recognition and respect for the people that we've lost in this, but life, so much to make of it. But I'm glad that at least some of us made it through, and we're rebuilding as we go. Indeed.
Yes, yes, I'm 100% in agreement with you. Especially, like you said, we're still here, breathing, and I'm seeing more and more people just take advantage of that every day, live out the dreams that they may have postponed in the past, realizing that time is of the essence and it's not promised tomorrow. So, I definitely
Indeed.
agree with that.
Indeed. Indeed.
So, from your introduction, we learned that you were born and raised in Zimbabwe. So, could you tell
Yeah.
a little bit about any key moments in your time there that contributed to who you are today?
It's wow. The whole thing, right? The whole everything builds on each other. So I've loved everything. In retrospect, when you're going through it, it's a little bit tough, but I'm glad that I went through it. I can talk about the fact that loved both my parents, but they were not together, so to speak, which led to me growing up in my grandparents' household, which really shaped a lot of my ideas about family. And I think I really lucked out, in a bizarre way by doing that, because then I got to grow up with a lot of my other cousins. At any time in our household there were 8 to 10 people, and then some. I got to live in this community, the same community that I know you mentioned, the nonprofit Clubhouse International. The same community that we work with now is that same community. It's pretty much the junior school that I went to, as well as surrounding schools. I have lifelong friends from that neighborhood, and that really shaped who I am. Even I've even made music that's a tribute to that place. So that's very important. I talk a little bit as well as, um, when I went to high school, I moved from that neighborhood. I went to a more, you know, my mom was back from college, so we had a little bit more in terms of means. I went to a more middle class high school, and just having those two very different worlds that I lived in while I was in Zimbabwe really shaped my ability to get into spaces, and my ability to relate to different groups of people. So that's very important. I saw one of my friends here, Simba, in the chat, who was shouting out that high school we went to and some of the communities we were in. So it's a lot of love. All that shaped who I am. My grandparents and my maternal family who raised me are all brilliant storytellers. So even though they didn't get published, but I know my two uncles. One was an English teacher in high school, and the other was a Shona teacher, which is our native language. So they always had novels galore. So from the time I was like in second or third grade, I was reading some of these novels that I really had no business reading, but I think that really helped shaped my love for poetry and storytelling and writing. So all these things are very pivotal moments that helped me to grow. I'll say one last thing, just because it features again in my poetry, and I've spoken a little bit about this. I was involved in an accident in which I was hit by a car when I was 15 or so, which is where I get my scars here from, and that maybe singularly shifted my focus in life so much. I was struggling prior to that, just trying to find myself, like many 15-year-olds are doing. But I think that really, I think I became a better person. I think I became, I don't know where I would have headed if that hadn't happened. Maybe I would have come correct still. But after that happened, there's the Shingi before that accident and a Shingi after that accident for me. So it really shaped who I am. So those are a few experiences that I can reference indeed.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you hit a lot of different themes, from socioeconomic status to personal trauma that, can really have an edifying effect on your life. And as a writer, I'm sure that you were able to draw on those experiences as well and put them into your work.
Absolutely. In fact, the novel we spoke about, Pashena, and I call it a novel just because it's but it's really a memoir, right? But you can't you can't call it a memoir unless it's as true as you remember it to be, right? So if you make up any details and so forth, you can't call it a memoir, even if it's like 99% true. So we call it fictive biography. So really, the story of Pashena is really the story of my childhood in Dagamvura in Mutare, Zimbabwe. And the reason I call it a novel is because there are some details or characters that I've made composite and so forth. So again, just talking about how it's influenced my writing, right? The thing that I'm proudest of as far as writing goes, it stems right from those experiences. Indeed.
Anyone in your family write as well that influenced you?
Not to the level that I've done. No, like I said, they were all storytellers. They would gather around and crack jokes for days, or just really break down song lyrics and all those things that really influenced me. My mom is a writer of sorts, but she's an academic writer. She's a PhD and all this. So I would read a lot of her writing as well, but it's more academic stuff. In fact, in a twist of fate, while she influenced me academically, I ended up influencing her creatively. So now she writes creatively, but on the back of me having done it. So I like that. It's this spirit of what we call sankofa in African communities, right, where you have to reach back and it's like a cyclical thing. The mother obviously has significant influence on the child, but now we see a case where the child has also had a little bit of influence on the mother, and that's I'm very proud of that as well. Indeed.
That's wonderful. And I think it's a paradox to some people too, because especially from the African cultures that we see, it's always that emphasis of respect and the parents come first. But now we're seeing more parents embracing and even learning from their children.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like what they taught their children coming full circle. So
absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
What you said also about things relating to oral folklore that we see, I think a lot of people from the diaspora can relate to the fact that there's a lot of stories they could even jot down themselves that they've heard from their grandparents, their parents, about going to school and going to the stream to get water and everything. It's something that adds to who we are in this new country.
Absolutely. And I will add that because I know you get this, just by the way we're talking about it, but to anybody else listening there, when I said they weren't writing like I was doing, I'm not trying to demean that storytelling, because that is the narrative that we usually hear from Eurocentric spaces, right? That these communities were pre-literate and this sort of language that tries to say many of our communities that may not have dedicated time to the written word like that early on, and that's almost used as a way to show that they were inferior at that point. But no, this idea of our strong communities and oral tradition sufficed, right? It sufficed. It not only sufficed so much, it almost rendered the written word somewhat redundant, because you know what, the future generations are going to know the stories because we are tight knit, and the stories are going to be passed down, and we have dedicated storytellers in the families, in the communities, and so forth. So when I say that, I'm not trying to say like, oh, you know, I stepped up the game by writing it. No, it's just that I operate in a different space. But you know, I think I'm just next in line in that very rich tradition of storytellers, indeed.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's very well said, for sure, because people have to realize too that the act of even being able to write and read was something that was withheld from so many people by those in power. So it had nothing to do with a people's intelligence or anything. It was really privilege that played a role in that.
Right. Absolutely.
And you know, you also mentioned that you have your PhD in African American and African Studies. So, you know, we've just been talking about how we're seeing the cultural influence being passed down from generation to generation. But what were some of the reasons why you chose this discipline, and what was the journey like for you?
Wow. So that's a very good question, because when I left Zimbabwe, back in the day, I left Zimbabwe to come here for college many moons ago. Surprisingly many moons ago. I realized how old I'm getting. But you know, and when I came here, I was studying international relations. Actually, I made sure at Penn State I was getting my master's at the time in international affairs. And the idea, even though African history and culture and the uplift of our people was always paramount to me, I'd never really thought about studying it as a specialization, you know. In fact, you know, I didn't even know a lot of these things existed, really. And to be fair, the idea of Black studies, or as it was called in my school, African American and African Studies, or Africana Studies in other schools, is not is growing, but it's not a rampant field of study. In fact, it was founded in the late 1960s as part of this larger civil rights movement, and very few schools in the big picture still have this. So I'm saying this to say, like, I hadn't heard of it is not a wild thing. But when I got my master's at Penn State, I went back to Grand Rapids, and I was working in refugee communities for a little bit, and that's when I started writing. I mean, I'd been writing all the time, but that's when I started writing, getting published rather. And I was just looking for ways in which I could elevate my, you know, not just my community, but even myself, and to make sure that I know some of these, you know, how can I codify these thoughts I have? How can I prove or disprove some of these assumptions I have about our communities? How can I make sense of what is going on with Africans at home and in the diaspora? And when I say in the diaspora, I don't mean just, you know, the second generation. I'm talking about even African Americans, right, and other what we call descendants of formerly enslaved Africans and such. And I started looking around for programs, and this is when you talk about, you know, a lot of people don't like to believe in these things, and or even I don't know how often I believe in these things, but this was one of those instances where I was like, wow, this is telling. I just started to look at a program at Michigan State University that was that program. And as I'm reading it, what you would need to have pre-qualifications, and one of them listed was you needed to pass a Shona exam. I mean, there was like 9 African languages, right? You know, the popular ones: Yoruba, Swahili, and so forth, Zulu. and on that list was Shona. I have never seen Shona on a list anywhere outside of Zimbabwe, you know?
Yeah.
I was like, wait, what? That's one of the 9 languages they offer there? That's crazy, you know? So I was like, all right, I gotta do this, you know? So I put in my application. Long story long, Shona never came up again the whole time I was there. It almost as if the only purpose it served was to encourage me to apply to this program. Because by the time I got there, the guy who had taught Shona, I think he was still there, but even he was a lovely guy. He ended up being on my committee, but he is Ndebele, right? Which is to say, he's from a different ethnic group in Zimbabwe, but he also speaks Shona. All this to say, I knew way more Shona than he does. You know. So it really was like, you know, I ended up taking other classes. I took Zulu classes. Then they even offered what we call Ebonics, right? African American vernacular, as sort of a field of study, which was very fascinating for me. So I did those classes. So I know I'm rambling a little bit, but those are some of the things that really got me through the door. And even getting through the door, I wasn't too sure what to expect, but the whole experience was just incredible, and I'm so glad I was able to do it. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, well, that's kind of funny because you probably could have taught that class on Shona.
Yeah. And but you know, it's also been a lot of growth. You know, it's also been, you know, you don't want to take that that for granted, right? Because a lot of us just speak these languages, and we never really think about etymology and these things. So really, after I had published a couple, you know, the poetry books, I started really pushing myself because they were all in English because that's the tradition out of which I've been trained, you know. But lately, I started writing some Shona poetry as well, and the numbers stacking up a little bit. So I can definitely say that I possibly could have taught that class, but I think I'm way better now, even though I never took that class, just because even when you learn another language, it puts you in a position to be thinking about maybe your own language, right? Like, oh yeah, so when they do this in Zulu or in Latin, even, it's like, what does this look like for us, right? And so forth. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. And you know, I'm not sure what period you were doing this course, but in the past, I would say 10 years, there have been so many, I would say, more globally recognized civil rights events in America.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just wondering, in line with the time that you were studying, how did that shape your perspective on what was happening in this country?
Oh, it was big, right? It was big, and it's led to a from a discipline point of view, it led to a boom and increase an increase in enrollment and things like that, right? But for me, it's very important. It was very important because I come into this PhD program in 2014, and we are talking about, like I'm saying, I'm taking this class that talks about African American vernacular, right? And there's always been this debate: is it broken English? Is it a dialect? Is it a language unto its own, and so forth? And we are able to watch. If you remember this, when Trayvon Martin was murdered,
right?
And that court case was happening, his friend that he had been on the phone with. I don't remember if I'm remembering this correctly, but she might have been from Haiti originally, but she was a young black woman, right? And she was giving her testimony, and the Zimmerman's defense was really making her sound dumb for the way she spoke, right, in what we call Ebonics. And I was thinking, like, wow, the inhumanity of this moment, that one, not only is this a kid, right, she's a child. She was on the phone when a friend was killed. And she is standing here before you, and you are making light of how she speaks. You're getting her emotional on that basis. And I say that to say it's more than just language, right? It's more than just learning that we've been here. Is not, it means we have, we've always been around. And sort of talking about that, it's actually talking about the weaponization of these things. So you get moments like that. You get moments where we, our program, which was a program at the time now, is going to be a department at Michigan State University, was looking like it might get shut down. And our protests now to keep it alive now sync with Black Lives Mattering and Black Academics Matter and Black History Matters and so forth. So there was really this surge of activism, and it was very reminiscent of, like I said, the field of study itself was born in around 68, 69, in the aftermath of Dr. King having been murdered, in the aftermath of Malcolm X having been murdered, and so forth. So I'm saying you can always say, which is true to your point, that these things don't never exist in a vacuum, right? So that was very much true to the moment that we lived in. And I'll say this too, that this was happening around the U.S., but remember, because global blackness is a thing. So I would be in South Africa for doing my research in the summers of 15, 16, and 17 for sure, and you find yourself in the middle of this march that is talking about Afrikaans must fall, right? Afrikaans being the language of apartheid in a term. And seeing that the same debates about language are happening here as well. When they talk about Rhodes must fall, the statue of Sister John Rhodes must fall, decoloniality happening there and here. So you're able to make these global connections as well. So indeed.
It's interesting because I don't think the media really highlighted the war on Black academia at that time. And the fact that, your program was at risk of being shut down, as probably others were. I mean, it's kind of insane because this is the time when we needed the most this education. And not only for Black people, but even people that could be allies from other ethnic groups. So that, that perspective is coming to the light now.
Yeah, well, and that conversation is not entirely separate from it. I don't want to get too political in the moment, but it's not separate from, say, the issue of critical race theory that's happening right now. Which the big thing I will say about that is, as many people as I have heard speak on it, right, definitely critiquing it, but even some who are for it, I listen to them and I'm like, wow, you guys have no idea what critical race theory is, huh? And I don't mean that in a demeaning way, because some of them are really like on our side of this argument. But for example, for me, it was only in my PhD studies that I learned critical race theory, So I say this to say, like, a lot of if there's a lot of misinformation about, kids in the 7th grade are going to be learning this. Man, even people who studied this don't even learn it until much later on, and so forth. So I say this to say the war on academics is usually, it's usually coded in those languages, right? That by the time the academics even get to be front and center of this, perceptions have already developed, right? So, and you can easily paint them as this radical, anti-white people, whatever, and so that conversation never even arises to the surface. So yeah.
I think that's definitely something that has come to the forefront a lot in recent years. And, another topic kind of pertaining to this, an extension of your academic writing, you also have the creative writing going on, the 2 poetry anthologies that you wrote. So did you face any challenges in the writing or publication processes, and if so, how did you overcome them?
So the writing process, I've never a challenge. Writing is what I do, and I mean, and as a creative in a variety of ways, you know what that is, right? The only challenge you face is, maybe motivation and stuff. But since I don't actually have to write anyway, it's fine. When I write, and so that's not really a problem. The first book, Homeward Bound, here is that one was, I self-published that one. That's my only self-published effort. And I did it in circa 2012. I was really just, I'd come back from Penn State, and, the family had gone through some stuff, and myself, my ends were not looking as good as I'd hoped. The doors that I'd hoped to open with this thing had not opened up quite like I had hoped. So, among many other things, though, that's what I mean by, you talk about, it's Testimony Tuesdays, right? So one of the things is in that moment when I felt I had my, it's been probably my lowest, in a long time anyway. But it was during that time that this first book was I put it together, right? I was like, yeah, since I'm not doing anything right now, I will, I'll put some of these poems together. I was able to get a few friends actually that I grew up with, that I knew who also write poetry. They contributed a few poems. So it's sort of taking shape like that. Got a local camera guy who was a high school friend of my brother, and again, we just built in community, right? Gave him like $30 or something to do a photo shoot. I got this weird little job at that time where we would drive around to different schools and host like a game show or something. I did that like one time, and it found me in Jefferson City, Missouri, one of these days. And while I was at the bar after the thing, I met this one young lady who turned out she was an artist, just trying to get a breakthrough as well. And she ended up having a picture featured in the thing, So talk about how these connections just happen, right? And yeah, so I self-published this by way of what was called at the time Create Space. I think the name has since changed. Create Space on Amazon, and it came out pretty well, So, and it's just good to, I was very proud of it. Not only because of that process, but also because it was also during that same time, that very same period when I was at home, that I founded the nonprofit. So one of the first major fundraisers we had was a benefactor who became a mentor of mine of sorts, had heard me perform poems at some women's event in Grand Rapids, and we built a rapport then. So he brought some of his friends with slightly deeper pockets around to hear this kid who spits poetry, and that was our first major fundraiser for the nonprofit. I think we got like $2,000 off of that, which again we put in to send these kids to school and these things like that. So that was the story of Homeward Bound. Now I'll pivot to the story of Mirage of Days Old, which was published by Sugar Run Publishing. So this is my first published by a publishing house, and the story takes me back to Penn State, because when I was at Penn State, I had met, I'm always surprised that I was at Penn State for a year and a half. That's it, because I have so many memories from there that you would think that I was there for a long time. And I met so many beautiful people. But among the beautiful people that I met was a still a very good friend of mine. Angeli is her name, and she does some art or something like that. And I remember I had asked her to create some graphic for me when I was there, because I wanted to. I can't remember what I was doing, but she had done that. But it was something to do with poetry. So in 2013, she hit me up and she said her and one of her sorority sisters, who was also a pretty decent friend of mine, Debbie, had founded a publishing company out of New Jersey since they were done with school, and they were looking for people to work with. So they put out a few books. Some of them, I know some of them were incredible, but they reached out to me and said like, I know you do poetry, you want to put something out. So we put it together, and that's when Mirage of Days Old was born, and it was published in 2015. So that one wasn't really a challenge to publish it since they sort of sought me out. And, since they were trying to build their thing, I figured like I could probably get this work published by a more established publisher. But how about we grow together with this, the publishing game is, for lack of a better term, is an old man, typically old white man's game. So if we have two young women who are starting a publishing company, you know what? Let's work with that. Let's support that movement. So that wasn't a challenge at all. And working with them was, for the most part, a delight. You have to be patient when people are still figuring it out as well. So a lot of things were not smooth, but not in an upsetting way. It's like, yeah, they're trying to figure out how do you get your books in Barnes and Noble? How do you draw up a contract properly at this thing? So I could say that was a little bit of a challenge, but it was fine. They put out a great product. I was able to get some very beautiful people to write. My mom actually wrote a poem that opens the book, as well as there's a professor named Dr. Geneva Smith, the man who's one of the legends, former Black Panther. Is pretty much when you say, people say she wrote the book on this thing. No, she literally wrote the book on Ebonics and stuff like that. And she wrote the foreword for the book. And it's just like, let me put it this way. In our world, I've heard people say, lose their mind because Dr. G said hi to them. So she's like the rock star and all things. So it's like, oh yeah, but did she write a foreword for your book though? I say that just kind of being lighthearted. But so that process was great. The challenge sort of came afterwards because again, they were still figuring things out. So for a long time, we didn't get the book on, they weren't able to get the book on Amazon, which, it's rough, what I'm saying? I want to promote, local businesses and publishing houses. So to buy from them is best. But also, a lot of people know that if you want a book, you go to Amazon, right? So not having it on Amazon was among, for me anyway, was among, it just wasn't happening, and but on their side, they're also struggling through a lot. So a little bit later, maybe 2016, 2017, I think the publishing house went belly up. So that was unfortunate. I know Angela and Debbie both are still doing fine as individuals, but I'm a little bit sad that went belly up. So the book actually, Homeward bound because it was printed by an Amazon imprint, right? And Amazon is not going anywhere. So this one is still available, but Mirage of Days Old is not in print anymore. So what you do when your company goes belly up, you retain the rights to the book, and now I can get it published again by somebody else. I just haven't gotten around to doing that because then I got to working on Pashena, which came out in 2018. And that one was a different experience. Again, worked with another young lady who had founded her own. Now, she was a friend of mine from Grand Valley State. You can see a trend here that I like to work with. So it's a young Black woman out of Detroit. She's founded House Capacity Publishing. And shout out to Kiera. And yeah, she did a fantastic job. This was different though because I sought her out and she had a few books under her, not an extensive list, but a few books that she had put out that were great. And she seems to be doing well. But since I had sought her out, I had to pay for this, to get it done. And it's pricey. It's not unfairly pricey, but it's a little bit of money, So I was able to So that part was a little tough, as a graduate student at the time. But we did it, man, and we put out this fantastic book that continues to touch lives, that I continue to be very proud of. You see, I have the poster in the back. I'm very, very proud of it. And at any moment, I just feel like I haven't, I did a book reading in Canberra, Australia for it, which was fantastic. I've done book readings around the US. The only thing that so no problem with the publishing at all. The only thing that I'm not happy with is the fact that I haven't been able to. We've gotten a few copies back to Zimbabwe, but I haven't been able to do it at the rate that I think the people who the story is about have not seen the book, and that bothers me a little bit. So hopefully we'll make that happen within the next year or two, so I can do maybe a tour in Zimbabwe or Southern Africa as a whole, and just share the stories with them,
Yeah.
Indeed.
Amazing to share the book with those who really inspired.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Indeed.
And I know you mentioned earlier too about the nonprofit organization. So could you tell us a little bit about the name, the mission statement, and how it may have been affected by the pandemic?
Man, so CLUBHOUSE International. We're actually in our 10th year of operation right now, which is incredible. If you know the stats, I think somewhere upwards of 90% of all non-profits that are registered fizzle out within 2 or 3 years. So the fact that we're still doing this 10 years later, and we've just really been stumbling around and figuring it out. I've always had the idea of wanting to give back to my community, but I started the conversation during my Penn State days in this international relations program, and a colleague of mine, shout out to Trevor, he had done a Peace Corps thing in Cameroon, and he came back. He was all eager to give back to Africa. I was like, yo, man, I got this idea. Maybe help me think through it. So I started to build. So he was one of the first people to come on board. I brought my sister on board at the time, because you need 4 people to start a board here. My sister and a good friend of mine from undergrad, Musa, who's from Zambia. So we started that. Then I started communicating with people in Zimbabwe and other places, just people from the same community who had also maybe were in college or who had made it. Like, yo, this is what I'm trying to do. So I would send it to a bunch of them, and they would read it, and based on how they responded, I'll be like, all right, this was lukewarm, or this was hype, or a lot of times I wasn't even asking them to be on board. I'll just be like, what do you think of this idea? Then based on that, So we built a board. The name CLUBHOUSE International, I can't remember some of the names we were playing with before, but CLUBHOUSE International became is an acronym for cultivating leadership and understanding by harnessing our unity in service. Right, so that's what that is. CLUBHOUSE International, and we started it, and our goal had been and one of the things that drove it was not just to give back to these communities, not just like, but to say there is a limitation in many African communities, and I think even here as well, though I think in the West it's a little bit changed, but there is a limitation in the way a deficit thinking in the way we approach education, especially among the kids, which is to say, unless you are book smart, it doesn't count, And what I wanted to do was create this program that could possibly give scholarships to students who are not necessarily the most book smart and always get the looks in these communities. Yeah. So we wanted to give scholarships to students who maybe do a lot of community service, maybe who are just good citizens in their spaces, right? Maybe they're great chess players or other things like that, right? So we wanted to disrupt that narrative and started to do that. and talk about again another little bit of testimony here. And Clubhouse really is laden with them, because we started off and we said we want to send 4 kids to school per term. 4 kids, right? At the time, I remember, I think it was like 35, the equivalent of 35 US dollars to send a child to school for the term. And we said 4. We agreed, me and my guy in Zimbabwe, Nyasha. Shout out to Nyasha. He's been down. He didn't grow up in the same community with these kids, the same community that I grew up in. I met him at church in a different city. So the fact that he's been committed, imagine you have your own community that's struggling, right? But you have given your life to helping kids in this other community that maybe equally struggling or maybe doing a little worse. So shout out to Nyasha, man. I can't say that enough. But I spoke to him and I'm like, can we do 4? Because I think I can do, that's like $140. I can do $140 a term, right? For sure. And one of my mother's friends had tried to start a nonprofit herself back in Australia. My mom lives in Australia, and it had fallen apart. So they had to, when your nonprofit falls apart, you have to. There's a clause in there that like you give all this money to a charity. That money doesn't go to the people. I think that's what happened. But in any case, she sent me $400 and said use all of it for the kids, right? This term. I say this to say that allowed us to do to send 10 kids to school.
Wow.
Since we did that, and this is where the testimony comes in, since we were put in a position to do 10, we have never done less than 10 since then. We've done, sometimes we've done 15. Now we've done 10 from each school to make it 20. We even have some of the kids, even though they were supposed to be to see them through primary school, some of them we work with all the way till they finished high school now, right? And the testimony there is, you set your standard, right? And whatever that standard, your grace will rise up to meet it. Does that make sense to you? So, like, if we had gone with the 4, we may still just be doing 4 kids a semester 10 years later, right? Because that's the standard we set for ourselves. But because by this glitch in the matrix, we had to pay for 10 kids that one semester. Bear in mind that this lady never came back and gave us more money. That was the only time she gave us more money. She gave us money, but she said all of it has to go to the kids this term. But after that, we couldn't do less than 10. And by hook or by crook, we've been able to do 10 and then some each term since then. Why is that important? It's also important to note that I was in college, then I was unemployed, then I went back to college when all this was happening. My friends in Zimbabwe were everybody's of like a similar age group, So none of us are these big pockets, whatever. A lot of us are only really coming into our professions properly now. So we were able to do this with no money, but again, it's the story of Elijah and the oil, right? Like, see if this doesn't sustain you. And so that's been a miracle. The last little bit well, let me say 2 more things. The other beautiful thing is about, I wanna lean in on this idea of testimonies. One thing that came up later is when I was doing this and I sent this money to Nyasha, I was unemployed and I was sleeping on my stepmom's couch at the time I sent this money to Nyasha. He didn't tell me at the time until much later, but he had been kicked out of school and went in college, and his mom is unemployed. And Zimbabwe was going through its roughest phase at this time. And he went to the Western Union with his friend to pick up the money. And his friend said to him, bro, you should use this money to get back into school and you can figure out what to do once you're back in. And he said, no, like that's not what this money is for, and he did. So on both sides of the ocean, we have 2 kids who really have their backs to the wall but being faithful with a little bit. That it's almost as if that was our test right there, right? And we didn't talk about it until like maybe like 5-6 years later. Like, yo, you know, when I sent this money, this is what I was going through. Like, yo, when I received this money, this is what I was going through. And when you see him now, graduated and is this insurance guy. When you see where I'm at now, I'm not saying I've made it all the way to the top, but you know, this program has run for 10 years, and I've gone on to do okay for myself. And when you walk in the streets of Nangamvura now, and the children recognize it, some of them are now, you know, in their early 20s, or when parents recognize us, and they, you know, when Yasha tells me the story of like a parent breaking down when she saw him, like, yo, you know, the things you've done for us. And it's not just the fees, right? Every year we do well, not every year now because of COVID and other things, but we, you know, as much as we can try to do an annual festival where we feed the community and everybody comes around, and there's a soccer match there around which everything revolves, and there's community service. I mean, there's you know, traditional dancing and so forth. But when we see now that in the past, like the community service events were pretty much administered by us, and they were part of the way in which those students earned their scholarships. But now, a few times they've just sent us pictures after the first, like, hey, Dr. Mavima, hey, Mr. Nyasha, we were at such and such house today. They needed some help, so we were cleaning up. And some of them aren't even in school anymore, but they've continued to do this, right? And I'm like, you know what? If all this came to an end right now, we have done well, you know, and I'm very proud of the work that we've done. And I'll say this is the last thing about that, sorry. When I started it, right, and the reason why we continue to work with those 2 schools, even though other people ask us to do other things, and I'm always glad to help with other things. But the reason, when people ask me, like, why didn't you spread to other places and things? I'm like, well, my hope is I picked on this small community that meant so much to me. I hope that somebody else, for you know, we can develop the same model. If we take these 2 schools in this part of the community, and you take the other 2 schools, and you take the same program to Zambia, and you take the same program to Ghana, and you take the same, I'm not saying the same, it'd be the same organization, but the same model, right? And we can build on that. I think we can do a great job of that. So in the aftermath, I've worked with a few friends who have started very similar organizations in other parts of the country, other parts of the world. And I'm also very proud of that. And a lot of people are very protective of their model. And, like, you know, you can't get, at any point, if somebody asks me to run through how we started this, I will share our tax documents, our constitution, our you know, our bylaws, our receipts and these things. I have no problem with that. I'll share the whole Google folder with you if somebody else wants to start this, because I think, you know, it's nothing to be, what am I keeping to myself? That more people be helped? That's ridiculous, right? So yeah, that's a little bit about the organization, a lot of bit about the organization.
That's amazing, because as you're giving back to the community, like you mentioned, you're seeing kids who went through the program and they're in their 20s, they're getting their lives started, and they benefited from the sacrifices that you and your partner made. So, you know, that's amazing to be able to see the fruits of your labor in that way.
Absolutely, indeed.
And for those
and another thing too, because we've been entirely volunteer run, a lot of the people who come in here maybe just fresh out of college, fresh out of high school, trying to figure it out. So even when I've seen how that's built their resumes as well, I'm like, wow, this guy, he didn't even know how to work with computers prior to this, but due to our communication and him having to collect records regularly, he's very proficient with Excel and you know, this guy, he's not a writer at all, but every time they do a community service event, he has to turn in a report. And these are getting really good, you know. So I've also seen some of my other friends, especially in Zimbabwe. Shout out to my cousin Shane. Shout out to Takura, who have become model professionals due to their work with this in ways that they may not have become. So that's another thing too. There's benefits on different levels to the game. Yeah, indeed. Mm-hmm.
That's amazing because you're equipping those skills that they need to go into the workforce later on
Absolutely.
in life.
Absolutely.
And speaking of
Indeed.
teaching, you're also a assistant professor in history
Yeah.
at University of Toledo, Ohio. So what inspired you to teach, and what advice would you give to those looking to pursue a similar career path?
What inspired me to teach? Well, let me say this. From a very practical level, the job most associated with getting a PhD in the humanities, for example, is teaching. That's 90% of the people. Don't quote me on that, but in my experience, that's the kind of work that we get into, right? At least initially, you may end up pivoted to something else, but everybody that I know from my school became some sort of university educator, except for we actually have a mutual friend, Tiffany Caesar. I think she works with high school students. She's a peer of mine. She was a year above me at Michigan in the same PhD program. But I think she works. Last time I checked, she was working with K-12 students. So you get those, every now and then you get, but a lot of them work with. So those were sort of the odds that were where this was headed anyway. But I've always really enjoyed sharing ideas. I don't even want to say like enjoyed teaching, but I've always enjoyed discourse. I've always enjoyed spaces that are fostered for discourse in a respectful but challenging way. And I think the college is such a space for me, for a lot of people too. So that's why I was headed that way. If I wasn't doing that, I know I would be spending a lot of my time doing things like that anyway, hosting these different indunas as the Zulus call them. Just gathered around to let's talk about this and have this conversation. So I'm just blessed to have been able to do that, and I love it. I love teaching. I love it. There's some problems I have with the university, not the University of Toledo per se, but I mean just the structure of the university, and I'll probably have this problem anyway. But the teaching part, I always say this is such a blessing that I get in front of a classroom, and for the next 1 hour, 20 minutes, I'm in heaven. Nothing else matters to me. I've gone in there after slamming the phone because I just had a fight with somebody who was very close to me, and walked into my office, into the classroom, 5 steps away, and everything just freezes, right? It's all gravy, and we get to talk about all those things we care about. I get to read the books I want to read and have inbuilt people to talk to me about them. We get to watch movies. We get to engage all these things on this level. So I love it. So what advice do I have to people who want to go into teaching? More than knowing the material, because I feel like most people who qualify for that job, they already know a lot of the material, right? In fact, I don't even think compared to my I think I'm one of I'll say this confidently, I think coming out of the community that I came out of, as far as the PhD community, I think I am one of the better teachers coming out of that. I don't think I am as good with the material as most of the others are. As far as like most of them, I'm sure are gonna become the most prolific writers as far as academic writers, in our generation. Me, I'll do okay, but I think I'm definitely going to become one of the better teachers in that. And I think one thing that I have that a lot of folks don't have is you gotta have empathy, man. I think empathy is very, very important. And right now, I'm teaching a summer class right now. It's only like a week old. We just started last week. And one student has just emailed me saying, like, you're the most understanding professor I ever had. I've been teaching online for like a week. What could I have done in that time, you know? But that's just what I, you know, I'm not here to mess up your dreams. I'm not here to just make it easy, but I'm also not here just to make things unnecessarily hard. If you turn in an assignment and you misunderstood an instruction and you say, like, can I please do this again? That's how life goes, right? That's, you know what I'm saying? You know, maybe not in medical school where somebody dies if you make a mistake, but for the most part, man, you get to say, like, you know, in your relationships, in your spaces, I cut the grass wrong today. Next time I'll do it a little different. You know, like, you know, where you can accord chances, especially as people are learning, do that. Just be empathetic. And just do a lot of self-reflection. So one of the things that I do is I keep a journal of how class went, right? And I revisit it every time and say, like, all right, so wow, this interaction was a little unpleasant, or I haven't seen this person in a while, or yeah, I think these topics here were too heavy to have them both in the same session. So next semester I teach this, I will make sure that I teach these maybe on 2 different days and so forth. So just, yeah, that empathy and that ability to look in the mirror and see how you're doing. I don't know, you know, and I think some people get that naturally. I know that I've had to work a lot on that. I don't think I may be naturally empathetic, but to the levels that I need in this space, it's taken a lot of self-reflection, a lot of you know, even asking for feedback, right? From, you know, sometimes I'll tell, again, me and my mom were like this. So I would be like, Mom, what do you think of this interaction? And I'll just describe everything that happened. So like, yeah, no, that person was out of line. Or she might even tell me that I was out of line, you know? Like, okay, cool. And I have a few other friends and mentors who help with that. So yeah, so that's the last thing I'll add, that, like, yeah, get yourself mentors. It was very tough for me to get mentors, especially male mentors, because of my relationship with my dad early on, and the fact that I was just, you know, raised by my grandma. My granddad was there too, who I love, most beautiful man I know. But I think my grandma was a little more hands-on with that. Then after that, it was my mom, and every teacher I had from 1st to 7th grade was a woman. So I always felt that a combative thing with men who knew more than me, you know, or like, you think you're better than me? But at some point, I had to humble myself, and I have a few very good mentors. Dr. David Walton is fantastic. You know, and other people like that I just allowed to pour into me, you know. And just allowing that to happen. Sometimes it's my pastor, sometimes it's colleagues, and sometimes it's just like even like my friends, you know, who I just watch, and I really adore my friends and the moves they make. And I feed off of that. Even if they're not in academia, they do a lot of things that I take back to the classroom. So yeah, indeed.
You know, there's a couple things that you mentioned when you talked about your experience with teaching that I really like, which first the journal that you talked about, and really just reflecting on how those interactions went throughout the day, and being empathetic, especially now that a lot of students are going through a lot of mental health changes,
Yeah.
trying to balance the transition with the pandemic. A lot of people transitioning from a physical space to online, or dealing with parents losing jobs, um, financial aid issues. I mean, there's so many issues that teachers really have to deal with when it comes to students, whether you talk about from K through 12 or even on the university level.
Absolutely.
The fact that you're able to kind of get that feedback from your students and listen to them and not just lecture to them is really important. And then, you know, like you mentioned, having a mentor really helps. And, you know, as a Black male professor now, you have students that can look up to you and potentially use you as a mentor. that, you know, maybe you didn't have as many of those resources, but the next generation is going to have.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, that's
Indeed.
amazing. Another way to give back to the community that you've been doing.
Indeed. 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 Indeed.
And
Thank you. Thank you.
yeah, well, you know, it's really been a pleasure discussing your journey through the writing, through the nonprofits, through teaching. Do you have any last words of encouragement that you would like to give to the people tuning in tonight or who are going to watch this interview later on?
Um, I'll share a couple words that I live by. And you know, take them as you will. One that I really like is go as far as you can see. And when you get there, you'll be able to see even further. I think we are often caught up in this idea of, you know, where's this going, or things like that. And we do that in our relationships, and we do that in our communities, we do that in our professional work. And it's really about taking it one day at a time. You know, if you can't see clearly where this is going, I'm going to do the best I can do for this semester. And when I get to the end of it, I'm sure things will become clearer where this is going. You know what? I'm going to be the best friend I can with this person. And when we fall apart, you know, so goes the game. But, you know, but only when I've done my best. There is no, you know, there is no, I say this to put another way is, that rule says, you know, be your biggest advocate, right? Be your biggest advocate. What I mean by that is there's so much in life already working against us, right? So much, whether for anybody, you know, of course, there's more disadvantages or challenges that we face as maybe people of a different social standing or an ethnic group in a certain space. But really, this could be anybody who has their own challenges, right? So there's already so much working against that. Don't talk yourself out of things. So I'm going to go to be part of this PhD program. And if it does get so difficult that I can't do it, you know, I gave it a shot. But what I'm not going to do is talk myself out of a blessing or out of seeing what else is out there. So, you know, and me and my friend Juan, when we started the PhD program, and we were feeling like, yo, this is tough. And we cracked this joke one time. I was like, yo, man, like, they're going to have to kick me out of here if I'm not good enough for this place. I'm not going to be the reason that I stopped, you know. And I've done that in the past before, and I'm like, wow, I wonder what could have been with that thing, you know, whether it was being part of a soccer team. And I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to get cut soon. I'm going to stop going so I prevent the embarrassment of getting cut until you see other people who are not even as good as you making it. And you're like, oh, I should have just stuck around. These sort of things. So that's very, very important to me. And I'll also say this, take the work you have to do seriously, but don't take yourself entirely seriously. You know, it's life, man. We're imperfect. You know, this is the quote that I sum up with is, use your best friend mind on yourself. Treat yourself like your best friend, because you are, right? But also, like, when my best friend is late or something like that, it upsets me, but I trust that they did not mean to be late. And once maybe we exchange a few words over it, and, you know, we're cool. Let's go. You know, let's get back on it. If as things go wrong, I recognize, I can't believe I didn't get this done today. All right, man, try again tomorrow. Yeah, let's do it again tomorrow. Just be kind to yourself. We are all going through it, and really, even the ones that look like they're really doing the best among us, you know, you don't know what they're dealing with behind the scenes. So just treat yourself like your best friend, because you are. Be kind to yourself. Treat yourself with all the grace that you that you would treat somebody else that you really, really love, because that's you, you know.
Well, I love all of that. I do. And I think more than ever, self-love is so important. And we have to
Absolutely.
give ourselves grace and just take things a day at a time. Celebrate the
Absolutely.
victories, because the fact that you're still breathing and still able to do what you love is a blessing in itself.
Yeah. Well, let me pivot on that real quick because that best friend, that's a very important thing to the best friend thing. It's not just about when things go wrong, but if my best friend puts on his Facebook status like, yo, I just got a job interview today, or like, I think that went well. I'm like, yeah, go, you go, and treat yourself like that too. So the little wins, the small bit of feedback you get from a student, the $20 donation to your cause, the, oh, I like your book, whatever, all those things, right? You may think like they're nothing in the big, but if you would get geeked when somebody else you loved told you that, you better get geeked. Yeah, like I'm hype right now. Last year I put out a music project. I'm not much of a musician, but I've already told myself that the first song of mine that gets 1,000 views on YouTube, I'm getting a shirt celebrating it because it has 1,000. A lot of people get that in a day. But no, this is me this is me and my story, and I'm proud of what I'm proud of. I get to decide that. So yeah, absolutely, indeed.
Yeah, I love that. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's excellent advice. I hope everyone is taking notes because so many gems were dropped this evening. I really appreciate your time. I know you've got a lot of projects going on, so thank you so much for taking the time to share your story and your wisdom with us. And thanks to everyone who tuned in as well. If they missed any part of it, they can watch it here on Instagram. You can watch it on YouTube as well. My link is in my bio. So thanks again for joining, and I'm sure we'll definitely be in touch.
For sure, for sure. Hey, let me just say this one thing about you and this platform, though. I really wanna, I would be remiss if I didn't do this because, like I said, I met Dr. Beauty here back at Penn State, but we were just in similar spaces. We didn't get to hang out too much or anything like that. But I've followed her growth over the social media spaces. And thank you so much for this work you're doing, and not just with this platform, but just even in sharing your own story, even with the music. It really does add a lot of beauty and positivity to our spaces as we see them. So congratulations on that, and may God continue to grant the strength to keep doing this, because Lord knows we need this more than ever. Thank you so much.
Thank
Indeed.
you so much. I really appreciate that. I try to just share any bit of joy that I can in any way. So, like you talked about with the writing, I love writing, but I also want to share that music piece. And
Mhm.
you can't really do that so much in the hospital setting unless you're doing music therapy.
All
So,
right.
I just wanted I guess you could say a music diary, so to speak, that people can kind of look back on and see the different days and different songs that might have popped in my head. And a
Absolutely.
lot of people really enjoy it, so I'll keep doing it, and
For sure.
we'll see how long it goes. I made a goal to myself to make a video every single day. So far so good.
So
I'm
far.
making progress. And the thing
Indeed.
is, when I
Indeed.
tell myself I have to do something, I really do it. Like you said, taking what your work is seriously. I really
Mm-hmm,
do.
mm-hmm,
And I know I just like you can be your best friend. I'm also that person that's like, oh, you missed the day. You missed the day. So, and I will critique myself. So even if it's an old one, I'll post it back and be like, hey, this is a throwback. As long as you see a video,
mm-hmm.
there is a video today.
Right.
Happy to hear that you're
Excellent
and
work.
there's
Indeed,
more
indeed.
songs on the way.
For sure.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, thanks so much again for joining in, and for your kind words as well. And keep doing what you're doing too. I mean, you've already seen the fruits of your labor with your nonprofit, and I'm sure it's going to keep flourishing. So I also pray that God continues to grow your nonprofit and the writing, the teaching, all the great things that you're doing for the community.
Indeed. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Indeed.
All right. Hope you have a wonderful evening, and we'll be in touch.
You
Good
too. You too.
everyone.
Thank you so much, Dr. Beauty. Indeed. Absolutely. Yeah.
You're welcome. All right.